There's a question almost every American employee has asked themselves at some point. How much do other employees actually earn outside of their main job? Not the headline cases, the actual average. You hear stories about coworkers with side businesses, friends with rental properties, family members making strange amounts on the internet, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder where you fit. Today, we settle that with real 2025 and early 2026 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bankrate, LendingTree, and other primary sources. Not anecdotes, not influencer claims. Real numbers from real surveys. And the numbers, when you actually look at them, are different from what most people imagine. In some ways, more sobering. In some ways, more useful than the inflated pictures social media paints. Most financial content about side income exaggerates wildly. $20,000 months from dropshipping, six-figure freelance practices built in 90 days. None of it represents what's actually happening across the American employee population. The truth is much quieter, much more modest, and much more useful as a benchmark for where you actually stand. Why does any of this matter? Because if you compare yourself to the exaggerated narrative, you'll always feel behind. And feeling behind makes people quit before they ever build anything. Comparing yourself to the actual numbers, the boring real ones, makes the bar achievable. And the achievable bar is what people actually clear. This video is the meta. Look, the synthesis across age groups, across vehicles, across the full picture of side income in America right now. Not a single demographic snapshot with the whole landscape. By the end, you'll know roughly where you fit, what gap matters most for your specific situation, and which numbers to ignore. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, side income, psychology, and why the real numbers on how much Americans earn outside their main job almost never match the loud narratives online. If you've ever wondered whether you're behind, ahead, or right on track when it comes to outside income, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up giving you some honest perspective on where you really stand. A quick note on the data before we go further. The numbers in this video come from large surveys, primarily Bankrate, LendingTree. In BLS, each surveys somewhat different populations and asks slightly different questions. So the numbers don't always perfectly agree. What they do agree on is the overall shape of the distribution. Most Americans have no side income. A modest minority earns a small minority earns meaningful amounts. That structural pattern holds across every survey, even when specific dollar figures vary. Let's start with the participation rate. According to Bankrate's 2025 Side Hustle Survey, around 27% of American adults have some form of side income, down from 36% the year before. So the share of employees actively earning outside their job is declining, not climbing. That's the opposite of what most media coverage suggests. The side hustle economy is, in absolute terms, contracting. That decline matters. For context, the narrative of everyone having a side hustle is false. The reality is that fewer people are doing it now than a few years ago. The hype peaked, and a meaningful number of people who tried side income have since stopped. If you're an employee with zero side income, statistically, you are not behind. You are in the 73% majority of working Americans. That's worth sitting with. Most people on your team, in your industry, in your peer group, have only one source of income, their salary. The same as you. You're not the outlier. The hustlers are, and among the hustlers, most are earning far less than the loud headline suggests. The actual median is a couple hundred a month, not the 4 or 5 figure numbers you see online. Now, the layer underneath of the 27% who do have side income, the median monthly take is around $200 at Bankrate, $400 at LendingTree. $200 to $400 a month. That's $2,400 to $4,800 a year, real money, but not life-changing money. The brutal stat hiding inside that median, 28% of side hustlers earn between just $1 and $50 per month. Barely enough for a couple of coffees. But the average is much higher than the median. Bankrate reports the average side hustle income in 2025 was $885 per month. LendingTree reports $1,215. Two very different numbers from two reputable surveys. Both technically accurate, they just measure slightly different populations using slightly different methods. What both agree on is that the gap between average and median is huge. The average is 4 to 6 times the median. That gap is the whole story. The gap exists because side income is dominated by a small minority of high earners at the top. About 10% of side hustlers make over $1,000 a month. That 10% pulls every average upward dramatically. The other 90% of side hustlers are clustered closer to the median, somewhere between $50 and $400 a month. And the gap between median and average is, by itself, a useful diagnostic. When the gap is this large, it means the data is dominated by outliers. Comparing yourself to the average in that situation tells you nothing about where you fit relative to the typical person. So when you ask how much the average employee earns outside work, the honest answer has 3 parts. Part 1. About 73% of American employees earn nothing outside their job at all. Part 2. Of the 27% who do most earn between $50 and $400 a month. Part 3. A small minority, roughly 3% of all employees, earn over $1,000 a month from side income. That small minority is what pulls every average upward. That's the honest picture, not the misleading single number that gets quoted in headlines and influencer content. And crucially, those 3 groups don't differ that much in talent or intelligence. They differ in whether they started, what vehicle they picked, and whether they kept going. The structural choices matter more than the personal characteristics. Now let's break down by age, because the numbers vary dramatically depending on which generation you're in. Millennials lead. According to Bankrate, millennials with side hustles averaged around $1,129 per month, highest of any generation. This makes sense. Millennials are in their structural sweet spot for side income right now. Enough experience to have monetizable skills, enough technical fluency to work online. Not yet locked into the family obligations that slow down older workers. Gen Z averages $958 per month among those with side hustles. Strong but slightly below. Gen Z has the technical fluency but less professional experience. The earning potential is there, but the credibility takes time to build. Their numbers will likely climb as the cohort ages. Gen X averages $751 per month, lower than younger generations, partly due to peak family obligations. Gen X is also less likely to have built side income online from a young age. Their participation rate is lower, but the ones who do participate often have substantial expertise to monetize. Boomers average $561 per month, the lowest of any generation, partly because the generational habit of one stable job is deeply embedded. Many boomers entered the workforce in an era where loyalty to a single employer was the norm and side income was almost suspicious. That mental model is hard to unwind, even when the economy has changed. There's also a meaningful gender pattern in the data. Bankrate found that men with side hustles average around $1,195 per month. Women average $611. That's nearly a 2-to-1 ratio. Not because women are less capable, because the side hustles that get marketed to women tend to have, worse unit economics than the ones marketed to men. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks something slightly different. Multiple job holders, meaning people working 2 or more separate jobs. In November 2025, BLS recorded 9.3 million Americans with multiple jobs, the highest number ever recorded since they started tracking it in 1994. 5.7% of the workforce, the highest share in 25 years. But that data captures only the formal, multiple job holders. The people building real side income through freelancing, consulting, or small businesses often don't show up in that number. They have one W-2 paycheck and one quiet operation on the side. The real population of people with meaningful side income, when you combine multiple job holders with quiet operators, is roughly 20 to 25% of working adults. Higher than the BLS number alone suggests, but still a clear minority. Let's talk about what employees are actually doing for side income. The categories matter, because the math is completely different across them. According to LendingTree's 2025 survey, the 3 most common side hustles among Americans are delivering food or groceries at 15%, online freelancing at another 15%, and part-time or seasonal work at 14%. Those 3 categories have totally different economics. Delivery driving caps out at maybe $20 an hour after expenses, and your car depreciates with every shift. Online freelancing has a wide range from $10 an hour to over $100 depending on skill. Seasonal work is usually minimum wage plus a slight bump. None of these vehicles are inherently better than others, but the ceilings are dramatically different. The employees making the highest side income are almost never delivery drivers. They're online freelancers, consultants, or running small specialized businesses. The math for those categories scales. Delivery driving does not. This is critical for context. The $1,100 monthly average for side hustlers is heavily driven by freelancers and consultants, not gig workers. If you're a delivery driver pulling in $500 a month, you are not actually behind the average. You're working a fundamentally different vehicle than the people pulling the average up. The vehicle you choose matters more than the hours you put in. Same person, same effort level, different vehicle. That's the entire game when it comes to side income. And here's a clean way to think about it. A freelancer working 5 hours a week can outearn a delivery driver working 20 hours a week. The math has very little to do with effort and almost everything to do with which vehicle you chose to drive. But here's the part most people completely miss, and it might be the most important point in this entire video. The average is the wrong number to anchor on completely. For almost any decision you'd actually make about your own side income, when you ask how much the average employee earns outside work, you're asking the wrong question for your situation. Because the average is shaped by a small group of high earners whose lives are structurally different from yours. What matters isn't where the average sits. It's where you sit in the distribution and which gap is actually relevant for you to close next. This is the single most important reframe in the entire video. Stop comparing yourself to the average. Start comparing yourself to the next achievable threshold from where you actually are. The distribution, simplified, looks like this. About 73% of employees earn zero outside work. About 15% earn between $100 and $200 a month. About 8% earn between $2,000 and $1,000. About 4% earn over $1,000. Where you fit in that distribution tells you what gap is achievable from where you stand. The average tells you almost nothing useful for your specific situation. If you earn zero, your next gap is $250 a month. Small, you can close it in a few weekends with almost any modest side activity. If you earn $50 to $200, your next gap is to $500. That requires picking a better vehicle, not just doing more of the same. If you earn $500 to $1,000, your next gap is to $2,000. That requires productizing what you do and building repeat customers. This is where the structural shift from transaction to system happens. The employees who cross this gap usually become the top 10% who pull the average upward for everyone else. Each gap requires different moves. The mistake almost everyone makes is trying to skip 3 gaps at once. That almost never works. The other mistake is staying at one gap level too long because the current dollar amount feels okay. $200 a month is fine, but it's not where you want to be 5 years from now. Pick the next gap deliberately, not by default. And here's the deeper thing the data reveals. The biggest predictor of where you end up isn't talent or intelligence. It's whether you started at all. The 73% who earn nothing aren't fundamentally different from the 7% who earn meaningful side income. They just didn't start. Or they started and quit before they hit a sustainable threshold. Starting is the hardest part. Continuing is the second hardest. Talent comes in third, far behind the first two. This is genuinely encouraging once you sit with it. You don't have to be exceptionally talented to end up with side income. You just have to be among the small minority who actually start and don't quit. That's a much lower bar than most people imagine. Look, here's the honest version of this whole conversation. The average American employee earns very little outside their job. The median is a couple $100s a month. The most common amount is exactly zero. You're not behind for not having figured this out yet. You're average. Most people are, but average is just where things sit right now. The question is, which gap is actually achievable from where you stand? And the answer is almost always the next one. Not 3 gaps out. The trend is in your favor, even if it doesn't feel like it. BLS multiple job holder numbers are at all-time highs. Side income, while still a minority pursuit, is more normalized than it was a decade ago. The tools to start are, cheaper and more accessible than ever. The math doesn't care about your feelings about being behind. The math wants to know your starting point and your direction. You're not failing if you're at zero. The system isn't built to push you out of that state. It actually benefits from you staying there because you're a better customer when you're financially captive. The financial industry sells products that work best when you have one source of income. Banks, insurance companies, brokerages, they optimize for the captive customer. None of this is a conspiracy. It's just the structure. Knowing the structure exists is the first step in stepping outside of it. And the bar to step outside, in raw numerical terms, is surprisingly low. $50 a month is enough to break the pure single income pattern. That's the first meaningful threshold most people skip without realizing it matters. Your future self, the one with side income or without, is counting on the decision you make this year, not next year. Not when things calm down. Now, 5 years from now, you'll be 5 years older regardless. The only question is whether 5 years older you has the structure you're considering building or doesn't. That's the actual choice. Not whether the math is favorable, because it is, just whether you act on it. Trust me. They'll thank you for picking the right gap to close first and ignoring the misleading averages everyone else is anchoring on.